Okay, so this 10-minute training looks at a fire and an occupancy that has residential unit above the commercial occupancy. It was a fire in a restaurant and tavern, and the owners of the business lived in an apartment upstairs. And anytime there's residential and commercial mixed together, it can present some challenges. And this is particularly true if it's an old building that's had a lot of renovations. And where in a commercial occupancy, we might have some consideration that the occupants of the business, if they can, are going to exit the building if there's a fire. The same may not be true in a residential occupancy if people are asleep or unable to exit for some other reason. So this incident involved a fire in a small 2.5-story residential over commercial, and by half story we're talking about a living space that's under the roof. So there's frequently framed out void spaces on either side behind knee walls, in addition to a small attic space. And this is in Whippany, New Jersey. The incident happened on November 27th at 12:30, so it happened in the middle of the day. Business involved was at an intersection of Parsippany Road and Mount Pleasant Avenue, and there were two fire hydrants in the relatively close proximity. One kind of across the street, across Mount Pleasant Avenue. And then the other one on Mount Pleasant Avenue, about 300 feet away. So this is an area view of the occupancy. So as you can see in the aerial photo, the building was built very close to the street, and it had parking on the Parsippany Road here. This is the front of the building, the main entrance of the restaurant. So we'd call that side Alpha. On side Bravo, and kind of wrapping a little bit around to the Charlie side, there's a parking lot, and there's good access from Mount Pleasant Avenue on the other side, and then there is an exposure here on the Charlie side, which at least at the beginning of the incident wasn't particularly relevant.
That's a small walkway between those buildings.
Yeah, it appears there's a little walkway. The buildings. To the best of my knowledge, the buildings weren't connected. So this is coming up Mount Pleasant. You can see the exposure on site Charlie, and you can see the business. Again, from the configuration of the outside, it appears that this has been added on to a couple of different times. And then here's looking at the same side of the building from up a little bit closer. So there's a fence, and there's some other obstructions that would make it a little bit difficult to go all the way around the building. And this is looking at it from the front, from the Alpha Delta corner, and then here from the Alpha Bravo corner.
So there's two main entrances. Got one on A side and one on B side.
Yeah, it appears that there is, and given that it's a restaurant and bar, I would imagine that one probably is an entrance directly into the bar, and the other an entrance into the restaurant. But I'm not 100% certain on that. Yeah. That would be my guess. And then this is a somewhat low quality aerial view of the Bravo Charlie corner, showing that small space between the Charlie exposure and the main fire occupancy. This is a view of the inside, which there's a couple of things that jump out at me when I look at this. One of them is just the incredible amount of stuff that's in there.
That's probably a pretty fast fire behavior when that starts going.
Well, and whether it was combustible stuff or not, and a lot of it appears to be. It's just an incredible amount of stuff to have to be working around. A restaurant is enough of a challenge with with tables and chairs and things like that to moving around inside. But now you add all of this other material, which is an entanglement hazard. And then looking up at the ceiling, it's difficult to tell with certainty from a photograph. But it appears that this is low-density fiberboard ceiling tile, which also would result in very rapid fire spread and a tremendous amount of smoke.
Would that be? Would you anticipate like a false ceiling there, so there would be a small airspace behind that?
There likely would be more than one ceiling.
Yeah, they built on it. But do you anticipate there being like an air gap in between there, or do you think?
Yeah, I would. I would suspect that that's possible. It could be that low density fiberboard ceiling tile was placed directly on a plaster ceiling. That's possible, but it's also equally possible, depending on the building. It could be that they created a wood framework below the plaster ceiling and then put the low density fiberboard ceiling tile on that. So I would say it's probably equally likely that it could have been no void space directly above it, other than the normal void above the plaster ceiling. And the other possibility is that you do have multiple ceilings in a separate void space. Either a small one or one that's a little bit more substantial. The ceiling height in here looks pretty high, so I would be guessing that if there is a void space, it's not huge, but there may be something.
And that main room is like maybe 15 meters, like 45 feet long. What do you?
Yeah. Maybe not quite that big, but pretty close. It's a good size. Appears to be a good size room. Probably the majority of the main section of what used to be a house.
Yeah, and then up to at least 15 feet wide, 5 meters.
Yeah,
probably more.
Probably
more.
Probably at least that big.
Yeah, 7 maybe. Yeah, it's a fairly big volume anyway.
If you look at the outside of the building, that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense.
Yeah.
We go back. It's looking like that's not perfect measurement, but if you look at the darker gray outline of the building, it's looking like it's maybe 50 or 60 by in a square. So.
Yeah.
And when you look at the aerial photograph, obviously the building isn't a square, but it is a pretty fair sized building.
Yeah, if that main room is all the way from Charlie to Bravo side, no, sorry, the Delta to Bravo, it's probably at least 40.
Probably 35-ish. And I would guess that probably the kitchen and so forth is in the back, so you're probably going to lose a little bit of that space.
Yeah, to the
looking where the vent system for the kitchen appliances are and so forth. That it's probably not just in this addition on the back. Probably sticks into the main portion of the house a little bit. So pretty good size building though. Pretty good size room.
Yeah.
So again, as is typical with these 10-minute trainings, I try to stick as much of the story to what actually happened, and that way the people that are kind of walking through this and thinking about the incident can compare what they would do with what the people that actually worked the incident did and make some sense out of that. So. We're dispatched to a commercial fire at 60 Parsippany Road. You respond to the incident as a company officer, and you have a crew of 3. And you're coming from the south on Parsippany Road. Wind is from the west at 20, with gusts to 24. Now, again, thinking about this in our organization, anytime we have a wind above 10 miles an hour, that means that we have to consider potential for a wind influence fire. In this case, it's double that with some gusts. And we're giving the a staffing level of 2 arriving from the south on Parsippany Road within 5 minutes after you, command officer arriving 2 minutes later. So that gives us a total of 6 within 7 minutes of the arrival of the first company. There's other companies that are coming, but they'll arrive a little bit later on. So the first question is a standard one: is what critical factors would you consider when dispatched and during response, and what conversations would you have with the members of your crew while responding?
So you said like 10 miles per hour would be your like a sort of a benchmark for you to start considering wind-driven fires.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a I would like to say that's about 5 meters per second, which is how we would measure wind. Mm-hmm. Which I would say is I agree with that. It start to be able to become a problem, especially when you get up to 10 meters per second, which is here 20 miles per hour. So I would say that is a substantial amount of wind.
Yeah. So, thinking about the critical factors, I know for me one of the things I would be thinking about is the nature of the building. Again, if this occupancy was in my community, I would likely have a fair bit of familiarity with it. This restaurant was a little bit famous in the local area. It's quite possible that either I or people in my crew would have had dinner there at some point in time, and would have some knowledge of the inside of the building and the nature of this occupancy. So that probably would be one of the big considerations that I would have as to, what type of occupancy is this? Probably also thinking about the building, given when the building was built. This is a balloon frame constructed wood building, so it has void spaces in the walls that run from floor to ceiling, or from basement to the attic, and that's interconnected with the void spaces between the floor and the ceiling. So a fire that breaches the compartment linings can spread throughout the building fairly rapidly if we can't gain control of it. So that's a pretty big deal. One of the other things that I would be.
Let's go back to balloon frame. Would balloon frame houses? What type of insulation would you find typically?
Well, that could vary considerably. It could be none.
Yeah.
Which is probably the most problematic.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
then it's an open path of travel. It could be.
Would it be common to find none?
It would be less common today than it would have been in the 50s and the 60s and early 70s. Back before energy became a huge concern, it was fairly common to find uninsulated balloon frame houses in that part of the country. Today, it's a bit less common. I know that the first house that I owned was a balloon frame constructed house, and we insulated it back in the late 1970s and used a foam insulation product where they drilled holes in the wall and from the exterior, and they put a hose in and pumped in an expanding foam, and that filled the entire void space up, which that foam burns quite readily, but not without oxygen. So that's one type of insulation that could be in there, or it could be a kind of a blown-in fiber insulation. Number of different types of products that could be used to insulate that type of building.
I'm just thinking because, like you said, to me, initial doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a major difference. The big difference is if there's any insulation or none. Because any installation would reduce the amount of, it would reduce the chimney effect from anywhere to a lot to all of it. It's very hard to get air to move up through whichever installation you have there, unless there's air gaps, and air gaps are the things you try to avoid because that's the thing that leaks energy out of your building. So of course there's bad insulation jobs, and of course in that case there's still houses that don't have any insulation at all. But I would think in my head that even in your context, that most of the houses have some form of insulation, which will prevent a lot of that air spread going up that chimney, unless we give it unless we cut a big hole in it.
Yeah.
Or the fire burns through a big hole.
The other fire spread consideration that I would have is, again, depending on where the fire starts. If we think about restaurants, fire starting in the kitchen is probably one of the most common areas. Fires starting in the hood and duct system, also a very common location for fires to start, and with again with the nature of the building construction, and then void spaces around hood and duct systems and the like, that would be something that would be kind of percolating in my mind as a possibility as I was on my way to this incident.
Is there any regulations that you have for for ducts coming from the kitchen area that they should be fireproofed, insulated?
There's regulations for the installation of the ducts. They're also supposed to have fire protection systems in them, and depending upon the how vigorous code enforcement is, those might be good, or they might not.
Yeah, there's always problems with, but there at least there should be, if it works as intended, it should be fireproof insulation around the duct. So there's at least a chance that when you get a fire in the duct system, that it doesn't, at least initially, doesn't heat through and spread fire to the construction around it.
Correct. One of the other considerations that I would have is that no matter which of the fire hydrants are used, it's going to involve putting hose across a fairly busy roadway. So there's going to be a need to deal with some traffic control, and that probably would require some law enforcement presence to divert traffic and so forth. So that would be another thing that I would be thinking about as far as relation of where the hydrants are in relation to the buildings.
I haven't seen. I admit I have not watched, but I haven't seen hose bridges like that you used to have cars running over the hose lines in the United States that much.
And I would say that's particularly true of agencies that use large diameter hose. Yeah. When you take a 127 millimeter hose line or 5-inch hose line, and even if you put hose bridges over the top of it, lots of smaller vehicles don't have sufficient ground clearance to be high centered on the hose bridges.
But I mean, you would have basically in every Swedish fire truck, and I think Europe is very similar. At least Germany, I know there's a lot, but you will find hose bridges in all the trucks almost to be able to put at least like you said, not 110, but if you put a 42 or a 76 over the road, you put hose bridges over so that people can pass them without breaking them.
Mm-hmm.
But
that was more common when we were working with either 64 or 76 millimeter supply lines.
Okay, so it went away because you're now using mostly 110 as supply lines.
Well, or bigger.
Or bigger, yeah. I've never seen a hose that big, but okay. So now, that makes sense. That if you're using bigger lines, there's no need for bridges because the vehicles can't pass them anyway.
And in this particular area, there's a pretty good road network. So there's if you did have to shut the traffic from the immediate area of the incident, there are other ways that people could get around without too much difficulty. But you need somebody to do that.
Yeah, it was just an interesting question because I never thought about it.
And again, as far as assignments to the crew, typically, with a crew of 3, you've got the officer, you've got the pump operator, and you've got the person that would be the hydrant person first, and then the nozzle operator second. Or if you did not lay a supply line, then that person would be the person on the nozzle. So normal assignments, just kind of reviewing if there was anything unusual that we anticipated based on the information we had prior to arrival. If we had persons reported or something like that, then there may be some other assignments that would be made.
Make sure that one firefighter or at least someone had the initial job saying, when we arrive, I want you to isolate the fire as much as possible, or contain the fire as much as possible, so that we can maybe, especially when it comes to more complex structures, that we can prevent fire spread or smoke spread to other parts of the building, isolate those parts and start ventilating those, to not let more people come into harm's way.
Yep.
And someone, if I have 2 people to divert to someone else to actively do something about the fire as fast as possible. Those would be my 2 main objectives. So to try to have designated persons for each of those tasks.
Yeah. And for us, typically the company officer would be the one that was doing that initial reconnaissance and closing doors that were open and things like that. If incident conditions were such that we were going to lay a supply line on the way in, then the firefighter would be at the hydrant, and if not, then they would end up being the one that was stretching a line to do something about the fire initially. I was thinking of you the other day because we had a report of a fire in a house in the town of Coupeville, and the first arriving engine and the second arriving engine were very close, one behind the other, and the first engine didn't lay a supply line. So I was thinking of you in our conversation the other day. It wasn't persons reported, but it just happened that the 2 engines were arriving at the same time. So let's take a look at this incident video, and before we start that, we're going to watch the first 10 seconds of the video. Because there's some things that happened that there was a occupant trapped on the 2nd floor, and that individual was rescued by civilians, and they did a very good job of getting this woman out the window onto a roof and then down from there. But in the scenario, we're presenting that as a problem for the firefighters to deal with rather than the citizens. But we'll take a look at the first 10 seconds. It gives us a little sense of what was going on with the fire.
A lot of smoke coming from the ventilation system.
Yes, and if we can, one of the things of this that struck me, you've got quite a bit of smoke coming from the hood and duct system in the back, so that's leading me to believe that at either 1, the fire's in the kitchen, or 2, the fire is in the hood and duct system. There's also appears to be smoke logging on this upper floor. Again, that just could be the appearance of the window, but it appears that there's smoke up there, and you've got smoke coming from the eave line along this first floor, which could be a result of smoke finding its way into interconnected void spaces between the first floor ceiling and the second floor. Up on the 3rd floor, or the floor 3 underneath the roof, You can see the blinds and so forth. So it doesn't appear there's anywhere near so much smoke logging up there, at least at the moment. And then the guy with the camera is walking around a little bit, so we.
Touching those windows is probably going to flare out. Keep looking those windows.
And we get a look at the front, and we can see a little bit of smoke again from the top of this bay window and such. All places where, if you anticipated either spread of hot smoke and fire gases into the void space between the first floor ceiling and the second floor, those are all places where that smoke would be likely to come out based on the interconnected nature of the interior voids. And so we'll assume this is what we had going on arrival, and talk about our initial radio report for this particular incident. So what sort of, and I'm vaguely remembering a little bit about how you described the Swedish Fire Service would do their arrival report or that sort of thing. What kind of information would your companies transmit when they arrived at an incident like this?
Well, that is a hard question. I would say, what information would I like them to survey? What would we actually do? Because we're not as nearly as good as you are, Ed. But they would typically say what kind of occupancy it is. So they would say that this is a 2-story house or 2.5-story house, complicated structure or something like that. And they would say something along with there's a developed fire in this structure. So they would describe the occupancy at least somehow. They would describe that they see smoke showing. That is it is a fire in the occupancy. And they would try to describe what else they see. In this case, it would be people on the scene. If this would be the arrival shot, that you would say that we're gonna basically talk to those people and make an assessment. So there wouldn't be much more than that. They wouldn't be like in the United States that you would, I'm assuming, command, or you would say that this is an offensive and defensive fire. That would be later on, like in 30 seconds into a minute after. You would expect them to do like a follow-up radio report.
Okay, and again for us, the beginning of it would be pretty much the same size. So in this case, a small 2.5-story residential over commercial, assuming that we knew that it was residential over commercial, with a working fire. And again, we describe the conditions as either nothing showing, smoke showing being I'm going to go look first, working fire meaning I'm going to stretch a hose line on this thing. There's going to be meaningful employment for all companies on the first alarm. And defensive fire conditions is the fourth one. So in this case, I would expect our guys would classify this as a working fire. And then we'd communicate our initial incident action plan, which again, I would anticipate our guys would be grabbing the hydrant that's across the street. So we probably would say that we're stretching an attack line, possibly on side Charlie, if we knew that there was an access point to the fire from that point. If there was not, it would be stretching an attack line on side Alpha.
But how can you make that decision from right now? That seems like impossible to make the decision where that would be optimally placed.
Well, that's the first assumption. If we had absolutely no idea, then we probably wouldn't say either of those things.
In this case, you have no idea.
Oh, I don't know that that's completely true.
Well, I mean, from this position on, you can say you got smoke showing from the east. You don't even know where you have entrances right now. Maybe you know that there's entrance in the front. Maybe you know there's entrance in the back. But what's the quickest way to the fire? You have to know roughly where the fire is.
Well, I would say that if I did not know there was an entrance from the Charlie side that provided access immediately into the kitchen, if I had a doubt about that, which I would suspect that there is, because generally, the restaurant's going to get deliveries. They're not going to come through the front door. They're going through a door in the back of this place. Again, if it was in my patch, I would likely have some knowledge of this. Alternately, if I
knew there was a back door on Charlie's side, there's a door in Alpha, in this case it's a door in Bravo, I don't know which one of those is best unless I at least gave it like 30 seconds a minute to investigate that.
I can change my mind.
Yeah, but why give like a chance on that? Just takes time to just pick something to chance of if you're very likely going to change it later.
Well, I'm not so sure that there's an extreme likelihood that I would change it from later in this particular circumstance. The other alternative would be that we're going to stretch it on side Alpha, because if the building in fact is occupied and there are people in there, then if I'm going in the way that the people likely went into the building, then I have a greater chance of finding them and getting them out. It's also not a tremendously long stretch from front to back, although recognizing that the nature of the occupancy, it would probably be faster to get water on the fire if I could go directly to the kitchen rather than through the rest of the building.
Yeah, but that assumes that this is a kitchen fire, which I mean, just because you have a lot of smoke coming from the duct system doesn't mean it's a kitchen fire. It could just be a big fire in the bar area, and that spreads to, and you're sucking all that smoke into the kitchen area.
It's possible.
Yeah, and that's why I don't agree with. I think it's a waste of time and brain power to do that much of a decision based on what you see here. Then give it like 30 seconds. Just describe what house is a working fire, and then do a follow up in 30 seconds a minute when you actually know where you're going to go in.
Yeah, they could do that.
I
would agree. That's possible.
Yeah, or even correct.
And then the balance of the initial radio report would be in an offensive strategy, would be initiating Parsippany command, and again, depending upon the resources that were coming on the incident, either that you were going to continue the first alarm assignment, or that you wanted additional resources. And again, that would depend on the nature of the organization and the reliability that you're going to get exactly what it is that was dispatched in the first place. For us, we would probably call some additional resources on this, given the nature of the building and the variable staffing level. If it was a fully career staff department that you were getting 3 engines and 2 trucks and several chief officers, and you knew everything was coming, then you might continue the first alarm until you got a little bit more information.
I would like, if we go back to my comments, I would like us to be better at those parts. Like, we would never state an offensive, defensive position based on arrival and so on. I would like that. That's a great add-on for information that they comment, and also like us to be better on communicating what you actually see. And I like this system. So a lot of the blue card way of talking, I would like to implement.
And any other part at the end of the initial action plan that we are in fact on a hydrant. There's a hydrant right there. It's close enough that the apparatus operator can stretch hose to it. So we'll take care of that after we get things started. So again, my expectation for our guys would be that the company officer would get out and would begin a 360 reconnaissance of the building, communicate to any occupants that happen to be outside as far as other people still inside, there's a report that everybody's out, and to kind of hone in on where is the best place to stretch that attack line to. Again, my guess would be if we had the hose line off the rig and we anticipated that we were going to make entry through a door on side Charlie, that I probably would have gotten around the rest of the building before we get too far into that operation. If we needed to move the hose line to another place, we could do that probably before it got water in it, unless I get delayed by somebody telling me there were people inside or something like that.
No, I would just make sure that someone does a 360. It might not necessarily be me as an officer, because there's might be other things. There might be a lot of people there on site. I need to interview them. And it's hard to take them with you when you go around. Maybe you start talking to them. So at least I know that ideally, if it works as I want it to, I want Firefight would start to identify where do we have smoke. Can we close doors to isolate that smoke more? Can we reduce oxygen to the fire? And start to build that situational awareness of how does the smoke look on, for instance, on the second floor and so on, if there's possibility to go there from exterior stair and so on. So to do those kind of things. And the other fire would see, like, where can you do something about a fire, something against the fire, and that would be a portable fire extinguisher, dry chem extinguisher at first hand, because before I made the decision where to commit the hose line, I don't want to commit that one, because I don't know if I'm going to go through Charlie or Alpha side, for instance, which would probably be the two main entry points. And they would help the firefighter with the dry chem would have as a part of this assignment to help me identify where do they think the fire is by looking into doors, looking into windows, and so on, even if they can't do anything with the dry chem. So that build that situational awareness for me when they report back, and I may be, during that time, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, I may have been able to talk to people outside and build my own situational awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the key differences is that is 5 people arriving together
absolutely.
versus 3 people arriving together.
It's a massive difference.
You know, I was thinking about that yesterday. I was responding to a report of a house fire in a neighboring district, and as I was getting closer and closer, I hadn't heard any of their units arrive on scene yet, and I was suspecting that I might be arriving before they did. And I was thinking about your dry chem attack as I was coming in on it, but it turned out they got there ahead of me. But again, something to think about. That's something that would be very, very uncommon in the United States for either a fire company or a command officer that's arriving first to use that approach. But I think there's some real substantive validity behind that, particularly for the fire that they encountered yesterday. I think somebody with a dry chem extinguisher with a little bit of application through the door, crack the door, and put some dry chem in, probably would have put a significant dent in the fire, if not extinguished most of it. So, so anyway, whether it's the officer or somebody else is doing the 360, we're gonna have a look at a little bit more of what's going on in the video. And we'll kind of start from the beginning, because it's only a few seconds. And at about 42 seconds in, we're going to discover a trapped occupant on floor 2. Yep.
If you touch any of those windows, it's probably going to flare out. Look, those windows are all smoked up.
Come on. There we go.
They're up here. On my back. They're up here. On my back. Go here. Go on my back. Get on my back.
Nice to see spectators actually doing something.
Yeah, they actually managed to get her off to come out the window, and one of them get up onto the roof, and between them they managed to get her out of the building, which was pretty good on their part.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
But let's assume
so
that never happened.
what's that?
But let's assume
Yeah,
that
in
that
our
never
story,
happened.
yeah, in our story, we're assuming that you discover the person when you're walking around the building.
Yeah.
She's in the window,
And there are no
and
people to help. I think this is an interesting question before we start, because in Sweden we are pretty much taught that the all the people around the scene are in the way. Like get away from here. But when you arrive 3 firefighters on scene, and you have, like in this case, you have multiple problems to start dealing with. If there are people, able-bodied people around, say, can you help that person out? Here's a ladder. They can perform that task. I mean, most people are not that stupid or that incapable. Now, I mean, it's an interesting question. Have you ever? Is that part of your plan? Is that part of culture to actually ask the people to do tasks that you deem them to be appropriate for?
I wouldn't say necessarily part of the plan, because the degree of helpfulness that you get is variable.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean,
I would say that the people that for us in our own organization, the people that have been most helpful are, for example, paramedics on the ambulance or law enforcement officers that we work with all the time. They're not necessarily trained to do all of the things that we do, but if you needed them to do something, we'd be able to help you in some way, shape, or form. As far as giving the citizens a ladder and telling them to go effect a rescue, I would say that would be very unlikely.
Well, I mean, you try to deal the cards you have. I mean, in this case, maybe you deem that this is impossible or not recommended. But on the other hand, you know that there can be more people trapped in there, so you make an assessment. Should I try to effect this rescue, which is going to take 2 firefighters, or at least 1 firefighter, to help that lady out of the window and get her down? Or should I take, for instance, there's a carpenter standing there. There's like a tool man. Like, you ask them, can you climb a ladder? And they say yes. Go up in that roof, stand on the roof, and let her out. They have no more. They basically, if you have a firefighter, you have no more training to do that than they do. Almost. I mean, they climb ladders every day. They understand ladders. They understand building. They understand standing on a roof. Again, the point I'm making is that I've never done that in my whole career. Ask someone from the public to help with something during a fire. And when I started reflecting back on that, I was like, well, there was times that I would need an extra pair of hands that does not necessarily have any training. Mm-hmm. I was just reflecting on that, and it was like, yeah, I probably should have done that. And it's just interesting.
Yeah, I think in my experience that oftentimes they're gonna do things to, quote, be helpful, whether you want them to or not.
Yes, but again, yeah, I mean, I think that's
and in some cases that's good. Maybe you stretch the hose line to side Charlie, and now you need it on side Alpha, and you're dragging the hose around, so they grab onto it and they're helping you pull the line. I mean, I think that we encounter things like that. We would not be inclined to put people inside the hazard zone that are not protected. Now, that's not to say that it wouldn't happen, particularly if we showed up with 3 people, or worse, with 2 people, or worse, I showed up by myself first and the engine is 5 minutes away, and maybe I'm going to need to get the ladder from the workman that's next door, as opposed to using a fire service ladder. But I think that yeah, I think that there have been times, particularly with light staffing, that when you need a hand that doesn't necessarily need to be trained to do something in particular, that people oftentimes will jump in and try and help. And if you can give them some direction as to this is what I need, then there can be some value to that. But I think the closer you get to the problem, the more reluctant I would be to put somebody in harm's way that isn't protected or trained to operate in that environment. But the other things, yeah, I mean, you use what you have.
Well, and I of course agree. You shouldn't do that. I mean, we have by law, as an incident commander, you can force someone by law to help, but you have a duty of care, meaning that you can't put them in a position where they're not trained to do. So you can basically order someone to help. Again, I've never done it. It's hardly ever done in Sweden, I would say, but you can by law. And again, it goes back to, I think there's a lot of situations where I should have done that early in arrival. Resources are scarce, and you do something like, well, can you run and do that? Can you check that? Can you look on the other side, see if you see this? Whatever. I mean, simple tasks that could be performed if you just give them a clear description. We're not talking grab that hose line, go in and fight that fire. But it was just a curious question. I think that it's interesting to see that it's fairly common, and I see that because I think there's a lot of fear to end up in the position where you see in especially like the Middle East, when you see fires from there's like people everywhere. They're the public and the firefighters. You don't know which is which a lot of the time. You just see a mess, and we of course do not want to end up in that situation. But
yeah, a number of places where I've been and kind of hung out with firefighters in some other countries that encounter that problem. They say it's a really big issue, that they'll pull up and the citizens will come running up and grab hose from the rig and start pulling it to the fire, and you know, it's like they just completely lose control of everything that's going on. But I think you make a good point that if there are things that can be done by citizens that are there, and you can give them that assignment to do something that's helpful, that's better than not utilizing that resource, and it's better than having them run rogue and trying to do something on their own outside the plan of action.
Yeah, and I mean, in this case, again, I wouldn't, if I deem that the person standing outside to be, you know, fairly capable, I wouldn't have a problem sending them up on that roof and saying, help that lady out of the window. In that case,
yeah, I would probably be a little bit more reluctant to do that than you. But again, as happened in this,
to what risk? Falling down from the ladder?
Well, either that or smoke exposure, or I mean, there's a multitude of things that could be problematic. I don't know what their experience is working on roofs and ladders, just because they're wearing some jeans and have a hammer hanging off their belt. I don't know that. I don't know that they're somebody.
You can always ask them. Like, would you be comfortable climbing up there and helping that lady out of the window?
I think I'd be more inclined to send one of my guys to do it.
Oh yeah, but I mean, again, given the we're going here, like given the options, like where if I have resources to spend, of course, but in this case, you got 3 firefighters. Of course, you need that. But if you can spare one firefighter, you got an option to do, for instance, with a BA on, go into an interior stair and look for occupancies in a more compromised position.
You see, what I don't know. Well, I do know because I watched the rest of the video. But what I don't know, if I was to just see this woman in the window, is she in the window? Is there somebody else inside on the floor that she can't get them out? If I've got a firefighter in a breathing apparatus with a tool, they can do something about that. Whereas a citizen, if they do that, now I've got two victims inside the room, not just one. Now, on the other hand, if I call my apparatus operator and told him to bring a 16-foot roof ladder over to side Bravo and put it up to that porch roof, I would have less qualms about having that carpenter hold the ladder so that it doesn't move while we get the woman down.
Oh yeah.
So I think there's something that they could do to be helpful in this case, and use the more trained person to solve the other part of the problem. So I think there's probably a middle ground in that. As it turned out in this incident, they got the woman out of there before the fire department arrived. But
that's an interesting question. We can move on. So
yeah.
But anyway, so if we get in here, of course, there's a surprise. This seems to be smoke coming out of that apartment. She doesn't seem to be in a very. It's not an immediate threat. I wouldn't deem that to be, but it would be
not a huge amount of smoke. I think one of the things that is relevant, and it may not be as evident at first glance, but she was hollering that she could not find Billy. Now,
oh wow.
Billy happens to be her husband. That's the name of the restaurant. It's Billy and Madeline's. So again, I can't find Billy. That may be a question as a ladder's being brought and so forth, is to exactly who's Billy and where do you think they might be? Were they in the apartment with you? Were they someplace else? Or you not know? Because that has some impact. As it turns out, he was actually outside of the building. She just didn't know where he was. So again, as a part of that 360-degree reconnaissance, you may know the answer to that question. Yes, he's out. He's over on the other side of the building or whatever, which is going to calm her down a little bit. Or if you don't, then that's telling you, okay, we now have another life hazard in the building we're going to need to give some thought to.
So a question for you. So let's say she's up there. There's smoke in her room, and you ask her, "Is the door close to the room you're in?" And she says, "Well, no." And then you have two decisions. So you either ask her to stay there, and the hope that the fire doesn't pick up because that's the outlet. Maybe she's in the chimney, or you ask her until you get someone up on the ladder, which is going to take a minute or two, depending on the situation. Or you ask her to go inside the room and close the door, but with the risk of her inhaling more smoke, toxic gases, maybe not finding her way back because there's too much smoke. So what do you do?
That's an interesting question. I think looking at the amount of smoke that's in the window, I would say it's probably on the margin of being able to ask her to close the door. If there was a bit more smoke, I would be reluctant to do that. The other part of that is can she get out onto that roof by herself without assistance?
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've talked about a lot. In fact, last Tuesday night we did a ladder drill for a similar circumstance, except for no porch roof, but a person that's in a window saying they're trapped and they can't get out. So we discussed that and said there's a big difference between a person. In fact, we gave them two scenarios. One was a person who was about 30 years old, and they were in the window screaming for help, and the other person that was 85 years old and was in the window screaming for help. The 30-year-old person may be able to get out onto the ladder by themselves. They may be reluctant to do so because they're afraid of heights, but it depends on their degree of concern relative to the fire and smoke versus their fear of heights. But they likely are physically capable of doing that, the average person in their 30s. But the person that's in their 80s may not be able to get out the window onto the ladder by themselves. So they're going to require assistance in order to do that. So that's kind of the situation here, is if the person cannot get out by themselves, I would also wonder, are they capable of going back to the door and getting the window closed? How long have they been exposed? So some of that is going to be looking at the person and maybe asking them, can you do this? They may say, no, I can't do that. I need to stay here. Yeah. Can you get out onto the roof? No, I can't. I'm going to need some help. Okay, well that's a different sort of a thing. So I think there's a number of factors that go into this. But if there was just a little bit of light smoke and they could close the door, obviously they've bought themselves a lot more time and made our task a little bit easier. If they can't do that, then this becomes a little bit more urgent. And fortunately, that with that porch roof there, that to some extent that simplifies things a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think the question is, can you see the door? I think that would be one of my because if they say, well, no, I can't see the door, I go like that, I would be very hesitant saying that. Go inside to close it. Go like, can you see the door? Well, yes, I can see the door. Okay, can you go inside to close it? Like, sure, I can. Take a deep breath, go in and close it, come back.
Yep.
But again, that ties into what you're saying about physical ability. I mean, there is a person there, and if they haven't got out now, it's very likely they can't get out. At least not with a lot of these may potential for more physical damage. I mean, there's a reason she's not coming out. Maybe she's not very inclined to head dive onto the porch roof. But maybe
I mean, part of the thing is looking at the space.
Yeah.
In the open space in the window is small. The porch roof is not directly underneath the window, so there's a little bit of agility
required to get out of that one.
Yeah. To get out. So again, that could be a factor. So,
but if she stood up there and she said, "Yeah, the door is closed. It's only light smoke," would you direct firefighters to put it down straight away, or would you first look at the situation below and see if there's anyone in need of more help, or if there's potential to knock the fire down easily and then ventilate?
Yeah, I think if the door was closed and she was not overly panicked about being where she was, the concern that I would have is if I thought that when I walked around to the other side of the building, she's going to jump out the window because she's concerned about the fire, then that would be different. But if she was relatively calm and the door was closed and we had several minutes to be able to figure out, do we have somebody else that's threatened more? Can I get water on the fire and remove the problem? That would probably be a little bit different. If she was particularly frantic, where there were other people that were inside that space, whether that also needed to be rescued, then that might change the dynamic.
Well, the question is, do I consider her to be an immediate danger? Yeah. Absolutely. And that could be, even though the door's closed, that she's panicked and she wants to jump. That's an immediate danger. It's a known risk. It's a known life hazard. I would go for that one first. But again, if I can deem that to be not an immediate risk, I could see if or immediate life hazard. I would more quickly look at for instance, finding Billy, and searching that house before I took her out. But in that case, again, what I would like to do, being better at in hindsight, is telling it. For instance, someone civilian said that your job is to stand here, talk to that lady. If the smoke starts to build up, if she's starting to be uncomfortable up there, I want you to come and tell me straight away. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a fairly easy task you can give to someone to give yourself a little bit more headroom to go to Charlie's side and look and so on.
I mean, that could be true if depending on if the again 3-person crew, if the other 2 people are already committed to other tasks and you needed to go get a ladder so that even so that she can climb out herself. Yeah. Tasking a civilian with talking to her while you go get the ladder would be perfectly reasonable.
Yeah. Again, looking back to it and go like, Yeah, I should have done that in the past. I should have been better. But I just looked at the public as in the way, and get them out of here, rather than a potential resource.
Yes, you would change your initial action plan.
No, no,
Oh.
I haven't done one yet.
So, again, in this particular case, our practice is that we have a picture in our mind as to what it is that we're going to do when we arrive on scene, and we're going to begin that course of action. For us, generally, it involves getting some hose off the rig and starting to move it in the direction of the building. And in some cases, a water supply component. In this case, it's close enough for the engineer to do that. We have an adequate amount of water for us to get started on this thing. So that is a little bit later in the scheme. So in this particular case here, we've got this trapped occupant. If we determine that she was immediately threatened and we needed to remove her, then one of the other two members of the crew would need to be tasked with getting a ladder to that side of the building. And in this particular instance, it could be the firefighter on the crew that gets tasked with deploying a portable ladder to side Bravo for physical rescue. In which case, I would expect the apparatus operator would probably continue to deal with the hose line piece. So if the firefighter and the officer the firefighter and the apparatus operator had a little bit of face-to-face as the ladder was coming off the rig, if the firefighter determined they could access the fire from side Charlie, he probably would tell the apparatus operator that, who would then charge the line so that it was ready to go as soon as we get some more help or we finished with the occupant. Again, in this case, because you've got the porch roof, it probably could be accessed by a 16-foot roof ladder. Used as a straight ladder. We wouldn't need an extension ladder. It's very, very quick, so that would probably be the tasking that I would provide them at that point in time. The other questions deal predominantly with what would you do if the occupant could come out by themselves, or if they could not. Obviously, if they can't come out by themselves, you may need to enlarge the opening and go in and help them out. Again, that may require a little bit more help because if you're inside helping them out, there may need to be somebody on the roof to assist them. Update report would include whether or not there was a basement in the building, and I would suspect in this case the answer is yes. Number of stories on side Charlie or any place where there was something different. In this case, still 2.5 stories. The fact that we have this trapped occupant that's being rescued. If in fact we don't know where Billy is, that we have a report of someone else in the building, and that we're continuing the offensive strategy. Probably, if we now knew that we had a missing person inside the building, this is probably going to increase the amount of resources that we would request for this particular deal. Tactical assignment would give the next driving engine company. Again, some of that is going to depend a little bit on what it is that we have going on with the occupant. Assuming that we're still in the process of removing this occupant from the second floor when they arrive, I would probably then task them to getting a line on the fire. If we had already got that done and we were prepared to do that, we would assign them on deck, which would be your one guy at the door in the Swedish context. So again, fairly straightforward for them, but there's a bunch of other work that needs to get done. In looking at location and extent of the fire, again, looking at the smoke conditions, we have a limited view. We didn't get to look at the rest of this. We didn't get to look inside the doorway to see what's going on. But my guess would be that this is a fire in the kitchen. and that it either involves or has extended to the ductwork above the cooking appliances, and that's going to present some challenges because the fire is now in void spaces. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to gain access to and extinguish than if it was simply a contents fire.
Well, I mean, you definitely can say it's a first floor fire. I mean, that's a very important thing to recognize. Like, you wouldn't have that much smoke coming from the first floor if it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And I would assume that it's very much likely to be a kitchen fire with that much smoke coming from that one, which means that it might be best suited to enter through Charlie's side if there is a direct path to the kitchen in that side. Due to the amount of debris you're going to find, a lot of obstacles going through A side or B side.
At some point in this operation, that the firefighters who were involved in the incidents shifted to a defensive strategy and determined that they were not going to be able to safely operate inside this building any longer. So one of the questions that I think is relevant is what factors would indicate the need to shift to a defensive strategy. A challenge is that once we commit to an offensive strategy, we've kind of have some investment in, we're going to put this fire out where it is, and we're going to operate inside the building to do that. And when conditions start to deteriorate, there may be a tendency for us to be overly optimistic about our ability to resolve the problem, and there may be a reluctance to shift to defense. I know that would have been the case when I was a young fire officer, that once I went inside, I didn't want to come out until the fire was out. I have a little older and wiser. I have a little different perspective today that sometimes we're not successful and we need to make a shift in strategy.
So they obviously got a roof. They got an attic fire going on in there. That small building there, but it seems like they haven't gotten the room and content fire under control.
Well, and
hard to tell.
I don't know. I don't know that that there is as much fire in the first floor as there is in the ceiling void above the first floor.
Yeah.
Looking at where the smoke was coming from that exhaust system, it could very well be that the fire started in that system and extended out of that into the void space, and so now the bulk of the fire is in that void space as opposed to simply things burning in the first floor.
Yeah. But I mean, so let's just assume that the room and content fire is dealt with. I mean, the bulk of the fire is down. Maybe it's smoldering debris here and there. But in that case, you have an attic fire spread through the attic. Now, basically, if you do a hole in the attic like they've done here, now you created a chimney in the attic, which is rarely a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only time that hole would be a good idea into the attic is if you from that hole could access all the surfaces that were pyrolyzing. Because unless you can access those and actually do get water on those, you're just going to create a chimney, and all the suppression agent you're putting in that's creating steam, which would help that attic to become non-combustible, is just going out through that hole.
Well, and I suspect that in this case the concept that they're operating under is pull the ceilings, apply water from below, cut a hole in the roof to let the smoke out. Again, I would agree with you that if you've got a fire in the attic and you cut a hole in it, the fire is going to get bigger because that's what's supposed to happen from a physics perspective. Yeah. But again, I think that if the application of water from below and then opening the roof to let the smoke out, if those two things are done together, then that can work. But the challenge is
tactic, and I don't understand why you should gamble.
Well, and again,
you get water on it from below, sure, but you don't open the roof up until you're sure that you got water on all the surfaces.
And that's the challenge, because again, if we go back into the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and we think about a fuel limited fire in the building, and we open the roof, the smoke lifted, conditions get better, we could go inside and put the fire out. In today's fire environment, that's very, very different. A fire in an attic is very, very different. But again, some very simple tactical rules that were developed back in the day that are still being applied, not necessarily with a connection to the science behind how the fire behaves, causes a problem. And so I think in this case, no, this is not going to make things better, and you are unlikely to be able to get water on all of the burning surfaces from down below,
or through that hole.
Yeah, or through that hole. That there may be some other alternatives, whether it be. And again, I suspect they don't have fog nails in this organization, but that would be an option for dealing with that void space. Leave it open, have a little bit of tactical patience.
Yeah.
Or leave it closed, rather, and have a little tactical patience until you can fill that space up with steam.
Yeah. And I mean, you still ventilate the room and content fire. That's no problem. I mean, sure. If you have burn through, like if you have a big hole from the room and content fire up to the attic, you don't want to pressurize it. You don't want to put a fan up there and build up a pressure, but I would still open up the windows to be able to work in an environment that is good. Of course, for rescue, but we assume that's taken care of. But just for be able to work in a more efficient manner.
So let's jump ahead a little bit and see.
I got like 2 minutes. I gotta go.
Yeah.
Oh,
so again. We've got fire coming out of the ventilators, so that's telling me that there's something going on with that. Jump out a little bit further. The smoke condition is increasing throughout.
I would say that this is a typical fire in Sweden, where you would see firefighters basically chasing the fire through walls, cavities, holes, and everything. That's a typical fire, and I would say always, but it's very common that the fire burns to the ground. Now, I would just say if you have tactical patience, don't open up anything. No knee walls, no ceilings, anything, and deal with those fires in a ventilation controlled mode. Get water into them, whatever tool you like, you fancy. Get water into them. Remain that tactical patience. That will be a crawling fire that goes slowly, but you have less visual control. And you want that instead of making massive holes everywhere in walls, ceilings, and everything, creating chimneys everywhere, and having a running fire that you know where it is, maybe.
Yeah.
But that took a lot of time to get fire officers in Sweden to realize that we need to have that patience.
And I think, you know, as we look at this, and this is 4 minutes and 15 seconds into the video, but where it is in relation to how long they've been on scene, I don't know. But in this case here, what we can see is the fire has gone from confined in those voids in very much a vent limited state to now we've increased the amount of ventilation of the fire by our fire suppression efforts. The fire may also have contributed to that a bit, and now the fire is beginning to build much more quickly. And again, I think the two concerns are whether or not we can put enough resources into play offensively to be able to control this, or whether or not the building is going to remain sound long enough for us to accomplish all the things that need to get done. And that's kind of that key decision point. If you don't have the ability to put the fire out, I think it's best to admit that and shift to defensive strategy and say, okay, we're not going to burn the exposure Charlie 1 down. If it's not safe for us to operate inside the building, or safe enough for us to operate inside the building for the amount of time it's going to take us to do the work, then we need to recognize that and make a shift to a defensive strategy.
Absolutely, and like you said, that could be a very hard choice to make because you don't want to lose it. And it's again, it's hard to understand. It goes, of course, against also how much resources you have. Do you have the ability to be everywhere? Because if you don't have the ability to be everywhere, somewhere is going to run away from you. Like so.
I mean, looking at how
it's problematic.
Yeah, looking at how things have developed here is, you know, if you're going to operate offensively, you would need people on floor 1, you'd need people on floor 2, you'd need people on floor 3. And again, there's all of the things that have been done to this point that you can't undo. It's kind of like with windows. You know, we tell our guys there's nothing wrong with breaking a window if it's appropriate to do so, but just remember you can't unbreak it. A door you can close, a window you can't unbreak, and the same thing holds true if you've cut holes, you can't uncut them. I
recommend, because the first time we did the house fire, it was long ago. This was, you know, early in my career, and we were supposed to do like a practice attic fires. And I went up to the hatch up to the attic, and I tried to make a fire up on the attic, and it was like impossible. It built up, and it just started to die down every time. It was like, well, it's an open space. I got the hatch open. Doesn't really matter because it was so hard for the air to go up through the hatch, up into the peak of the roof, and all the way down to this soffit vents. No, it's not soffits. Gable. No, it's soffits.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was hard to go all the way down, so you didn't get that chimney. You didn't get that air track, and basically it just died down. And even though there's a lot of ventilation at the soffits and the window hatch was open, which is like at least not 3 by 3 feet at least, and you had to actively put a fan on up through that hole to be able to get that fire going. And it's a very good exercise to do. And I know that people have done like training on attic fires, experience the same problem, that they have to basically cut holes to get the fire going in the attic, and then put them tight, and then do the drill. And go like, well, that should be a clue. Don't make a hole. So, but anyway, I gotta go now. I need to pick up my kid. But that was an interesting one. I think that you could talk a lot more about this one, especially when you get to the position where they were probably in the beginning when they've dealt with the structure fire, the room and content fire. It became a structure fire, which has a whole range of new problems.
Indeed.
But I did a training, and I was recently in Norway for 4 days, and I very early in the training I said there's no need to ever have a chainsaw on the fire truck. And the firefighter was like But my point was there's no need to cut a hole fast, because if you're in a position when you need to cut a hole fast, you should wait. You should only cut holes when it's not a rush for it, and then you can use other tools. I had nothing against chainsaws and so on. It was just, again, a way to frame that you should rarely, when you're in a hurry, you should cut a hole, because it will get you in more of a hurry unless you cut it in the exactly in the right place, and a lot of that time it might be down to guesswork. And that's problematic. But okay, thanks for today, Ed. It was nice talking to you.
Okay, good enough. We'll talk to you later.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.